What was it feeling like of having very little understanding about finance and then immersing yourself in it? And
Yeah,
then,
it was
and then
fascinating.
realizing that this is the underlying structure that our society is run on, that our money is established through. Like this is how we sell houses and loans, and this is what we're doing.
It was fascinating. Because before that, I was mostly covering like elections, right? And again, if you cover elections, it's incredibly boring, and you never hear anything of substance, and it's not terribly complicated. And the Democrat says that we want to help the middle class, and the Republican says we want to protect family values, and that's pretty much the extent of the intellectual challenge. And I always thought to myself, politics in America must be a lot more complicated than this, right? There must be some other hidden thing where it's incredibly complex and diabolical, and the real machinations of power must be visible somewhere. You find that when you start looking into how Wall Street works, how money works, how central banking works, how the concentration of wealth works. Basically, the subprime scheme was an effort to pull the remaining savings out of the population. In the old days, investment banks made their money by lending money to companies who would build factories, and they would make stuff and sell it around the world, and everybody would make money, and even the population would benefit from it. But that manufacturing economy, it's all gone. It's overseas. So you have this financialized economy, and they have no normal beneficial way to make money, and all they can really do is look to see where is their money and how can we get it. And most people had money in their houses. The accumulated savings of most people, whatever was left after the internet crash in the 90s, was in real estate. And this was the scam by which they took the wealth that was left in the pockets of ordinary people and transferred it to 9 people in Manhattan, basically. I mean, that's why you have, when we talk about wealth inequality now, right, it being a huge factor that the top 1% of the population owns 90% of the wealth in the country, or whatever it is. That's a consequence of schemes like this, where they're finding out where people have a little bit of money, and they're systematically coming up with scams to move it from there to here.
With no consequence.
No, with no consequence. And that was the other part of the story that I ended up having to cover later, which was, the last time they tried something like this, like during the SNL crisis, which was also sort of a giant fraud scheme also that involved real estate lending, and, but the government after that actually, indicted 1,800 people. They put 800 people in jail. They put a lot of, serious influential people on the dock after that. Nobody went to jail after this stuff. And people think that, well, they didn't do anything that was technically illegal. There was lots of stuff that was brazenly criminally illegal. I mean, they committed fraud on a broad scale, but some of these companies were into things that were even worse than that. I mean, you take HSBC. HSBC admitted to laundering $850 million for a pair of Central and South American drug cartels, including the Sinaloa cartel, right, which is suspected in thousands of murders. They admitted to this activity. They agreed to a deferred prosecution agreement with the government where nobody did a day in jail. No individual had to pull out a dime out of their own pockets to pay. The shareholders ponied up $1.9 million, but some of that was tax deductible, which means we paid some of that fine. And the only real punishment with any teeth is that some of the executives had to partially defer their bonuses for 5 years. So
that's it.
Laundering $850 million for narco terrorists gets you a total walk. That tells you basically everything you need to know about, do we prosecute white collar crime in this country? Basically, no. That's the answer ultimately that you find out.
And there was paperwork that showed they knew it was from the cartels?
Oh yeah, if you look at the agreement, and you can watch this. There's a video of Loretta Lynch and Lanny Brewer, because this is before Loretta Lynch was Attorney General, but she was basically the head of this deal. They talked about the fact that the HSBC branches, because most of this was done in Mexico, HMEX, which was the subsidiary company, they had special teller windows built to fit cash boxes that the drug cartels were bringing into the bank. So basically, you've seen the scene in Scarface where the guys come in with duffel bags of cash to the bank, right? And it's like a montage. There's that song. I forget what song it is in the background. Same thing. These guys would come into the bank. They would slide in these boxes of cash one after the other, and that's admitted activity. The bank signed off on this. It's not like they're contesting it. They're not saying we neither admit nor deny. It's part of the deal. And they agreed to the amount, everything. Yeah, it was a $1.9 billion settlement, but it's not like it came out of the pockets of the people who did it, and it's not like any of the people who did it are in jail. It's just a thing that happened, and that's 5 weeks of profit for the bank. So what the fuck? They don't care, right?
Did you see the documentary The Inside Job?
Yeah. We covered a lot of the same territory. Definitely. Yeah.
That was a sobering documentary where they're talking to the very people that caused the financial crisis and realizing that these people were economics professors that eventually got these jobs, really lucrative jobs with banks, and how they finagled this system and made it so it looked like these things were appropriate.
Some of the things that they invented that made the crash possible sounded like good ideas. They came up with this thing called the credit default swap, right? And I won't bore you with what that is exactly, but basically it's a kind of insurance. It's basically a bet. It's hard to explain. It's a way of quasi-insuring a product without having to pony up a lot of money. It's called a derivative. These instruments are completely unregulated. How can I put this? A credit default swap is like you and I betting on whether or not a third person's house is going to burn in a fire, right? Like the old school insurance said that it had to be your house in order for you to get insurance on it. This new form of quasi-insurance said that two totally disinterested parties could have an interest in a third thing that happens. So it's basically gambling. On the one hand, it allowed people to create a whole lot of capital, which allowed them to lend more money, which theoretically allowed people to buy more houses. But in reality, it just created the system where all these people had bets that were back and forth on all these properties. So that's one of the reasons why when the crash happened, when all those mortgages started to fail, it wasn't just the failures of those properties. It was all these people who were betting on whether or not these people could pay their mortgages. They started to lose money. And then there were people who had bets on that who started to lose money. And it's like this cascading whirlpool of shit that happened. Again, it started out as an idea to just create more money to lend. And it turned into this nightmare mechanical scenario that created losses, in this almost apocalyptic fashion. And a lot of them had no idea that was going to be the eventuality.
Wow.
Yeah.